All right. Today is Tuesday, December 12th. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. So we've only got a couple of things here on the meeting notes. I can put the link into the lobby chat here for y'all. If anybody's got anything to add, feel free. It's good to see you, John. Good to see you, Nick, Palav, Sasha, Peepaw joined and left.
Yeah, long time no see.
Yeah.
Uh,
Questions for Rainier. Oh, Putz is here. Hey, Putz. I thought you were actually putting for $33. That's
Yeah,
funny.
each question we ask him costs us $33.
Yeah.
And that's how he's gonna fund his next trip to the US.
And that is issue 44. Let me open that up. Okay. So me and Nick have been working on the info endpoint. We have a draft RFC that's available. I linked it into the document there. And we've gone over a good amount of information on that. We've also been working on the config options endpoint or the schema, I guess, itself. But we've got everything in there. We've got everything described out. The name, protocol version, URL description, Git, docs, and issues are the fields that are going to be in the info endpoint right now. The other RFC for the config options will extend this RFC if anybody's interested in taking a look. This RFC assumes that the version will be V2, so every link in there is for V2. And there were some questions we had um, as far as this info endpoint goes. Down at the bottom, there's uh, the first one was we believe this is a great endpoint to store more information in the future. What do you think? And the idea with that is like the config options endpoint, where we're extending the info endpoint to include that information. I think it works really well for more templated info that we could fill in into the future. What do you think about Nick?
Yeah. I mean, I think you pretty much covered. Like, we're just waiting on questions. I don't know. There's lots of stuff to come with it.
Uh, Quick question. So it's gonna be AP/info. Shouldn't be like United it should be APv2. I'm looking at the last line in the questions. I think it should have version numbers associated with it.
That's if you scroll up to the top, you'll see the actual endpoint. The counter argument for that is if I go to AP/info, I can find the version for the rest of the tools.
I see. So are you guys debating between AP/info or between AP/info and AP/v2/agent/info?
Correct. That is where we are.
I see. Um, I can see arguments for both. Um,
The doing it at the V whatever, um, really depends on how we want. Like, does V3 implement all V2 endpoints plus these, or does V3 only implement new endpoints, or like I don't know. I can see having a just /info be very useful. And the way you identify whether or not this is past version 2 is get the info endpoint. And then the first thing is you read the protocol and then you parse stuff that. I can see that being pretty difficult though for developers.
Like
If we-
dynamically, they have to call it once first before deciding the schema. Right?
Yeah,
So-
exactly. However, if we put it at V2, what happens when we publish V3? Do we now have V3 agent info? And if so, how do they know that V3 is the correct one to ask? Right?
Yeah.
Or V50 or V72, right? Like,
Yeah.
so.
I think having an unversioned info endpoint makes sense, even if it's just to get the protocol version number.
Oh, just having like a /version?
Well, I was thinking /info, but /version works as well. Like,
Yeah.
you need something to prime the client on.
I think we don't need to have either or. We can have both, right?
I could see having /info on the agent being super useful and just having a like /version, like AP/version. Here, let me just having this like a /AP/version, right? And that just returns like 2. And then we have /AP/ if I can type
Oh, I
/v2
see. I see.
/agent/info returns this. Right.
Yeah.
And it returns the proposal body basically.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it really matters that much what else is in the one unversioned info endpoint that we have and what it's called, as long as you can get the protocol version from an endpoint that is not behind the version number.
Yeah. So my concern with having other info in there is, let's say you want to automatically parse this, right? And we change the fields. Your client could break if your agent updates, which I don't think is necessarily something cool to do.
Because the schema changes
Yeah.
with the version, you mean?
Yeah. So I think we should add a just /version endpoint. And then just go from there. That way you can do whatever you need to do. Or maybe
But
/protocol version.
I still think having like the version number like IPv2 in the URL is helpful, because even though, let's say, the version /versions returns 3, it should know that you can still call the old version as well, like for the client to not have the client break. What if the agent changes this to the latest version, but it's still backward compatible? Then the client should have the option to change it to the latest version, but also can keep the old version and not have it break, if that makes any sense.
So you want more of a supported versions matrix, right? Like
Yeah.
I support 1 through 17, or right?
Yeah. Maybe instead of AP/version, it should be AP/versions to return all supported versions.
As long as the SDK supports that backwards compatibility element, then it should be fine. But I mean, I don't know. I guess because that you're talking about like its own endpoint that we would call to say these are the versions that this agent is compatible with across the
I can
board,
see
or
that.
would
Yeah,
it be
I
on
mean,
the client to be compatible with multiple versions and the agent is only one version?
I think also it doesn't need to be like AP/versions. It could literally just be AP/info, and it returns in the info endpoint. It returns, conforming what the agents can respond to. What
Right, but that
versions
would
the agents
that would break strongly typed languages, right? That are trying to parse that theoretically, right? Like, so if I say this is always going to have these 7 parameters, we can never change that because it won't be able to be converted into those objects without like losing info.
No, so the way that you call these agents is still through AP/V something. So the version number specifies exactly what version you're calling into. So the schema should support that particular version.
Right. So this is V2, right? Here, I'm
Mhm.
listening. This is our V2, right? What
Mhm.
if one day we come along and say, hey, actually, do. This is a terrible example. That's the new schema, and you have to send your favorite color, and it's required.
Mhm.
And everybody upgrades that version. Whenever somebody goes to get the /AP/info endpoint, they would get a different
Mhm.
object back from what they're expecting. Right. Oh, hey, let me change the protocol to like 35 or something. Right. Does that make sense?
So yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is that um the so there are in the info endpoint there are yeah, exactly. So there are in the endpoint there are required and optional parameters. So
Right.
what the user would then do is to read the info endpoint, get back the version, and then like do a switch to let the client know what the type of the info endpoint should be based on the version. Um, uh, if that makes any sense. And then like since you already called the info endpoint, it's in the schema, it's in the JSON schema format. You then can convert that JSON schema format into the strongly typed
Okay.
language.
So, John, you're saying additive changes won't break them?
Yeah, generally in my experience, I've used a lot of like Swift in the past, and yeah, you generally would just define like a struct that has whatever properties, and if you're parsing like a JSON, API endpoint response, it wouldn't break it, but unless you're like validating for some reason that it exactly matches what you're expecting, which I'm not aware of any languages that would do that by default.
Okay. But subtractive changes could break it. Like if we decided, hey, we're no longer
Or like
sending.
changing the type or something could break things.
Okay. So,
Yeah, and I'm more also referring to like maybe would it make sense to have a supported version array, where you like talk about all the supported versions, etc.
yeah, I could see
All
slash
of these.
versions returning that very easily. Like something like returning that what you have. Um, I could see that making a ton of sense
Okay, yeah, we could do it that way too.
because that way we don't have to worry about anybody doing some weird stuff. And I can say, hey, I don't support V1. Like let's say all of V1 later gets obsoleted. Yeah. Exactly what you're talking about, Sasha. I could say all of V1 gets obsoleted at some point down the road, right? And I could say I only support from 2 to 15 or whatever. That works for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could also use like for instance in npm, package.json, there's examples of this, but just not a regular expression, but the version specifier. So you could specify a range or like greater than or less than. There's kind of a lot of exactly, a lot of common existing work on that.
Yeah. Something important to keep in mind is we only support like integer versions. Which was a choice we
True.
made. So a lot of that work may be just like not difficult,
I think
agree.
what we decided was that we can have minor versions, but the thing is the integer versions. So if you have like v1, anything after v1, v1.2.3, etc., it would not break the schema. It's like changes that we make to like, I don't know, like do like minor changes, but major changes would be a new version, right? If I remember correctly, that was a discussion.
I was under the impression we just didn't have minor versions, but I could coalesce
In
that.
the endpoint, we don't have minor versions, but I think on the schema itself, we would have a similar versioning. It's just that the only time we update the integer in the endpoint is whenever there's a major version. So it maps to the major version, but we don't put the entire thing into the URL. That was, I think, the idea.
Yep.
That's what you were saying, right, Sasha?
Yeah, so the minor version does not break the schema. So v1 anything is the same as v1, which is why we put it in the string /AP/v1 or v2.
Right.
Is someone taking notes of this? Just so we're all on the same page.
Well, I'm recording.
That's right. Okay, cool. It sounds like we got the feedback about the version. Any other?
So wait, actually, just to be clear, should we have version become the protocol field in the info endpoint here? Should we have that be an array of strings or an array of integers to allow for supported versions, or should we create a separate endpoint for supported versions?
My understanding is we were creating a separate endpoint for supported versions.
I also like the separate endpoint.
Okay. So then on the info endpoint, the version would be the most up-to-date version that the agent would have, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll play devil's advocate for not splitting it. I mean, really, the only thing is performance, and I guess you could do them in parallel, but you'd have to wait for both responses, and it's just an extra network call. Add a little latency.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
true.
theoretically, if you know the correct version, you don't have to call it, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess it would be the kind of thing that if, from a client's perspective, if you call the info endpoint, because the info endpoint would hopefully stay the same throughout all the versions in the future. You call the info endpoint and it says it's version 4, and your client only supports version 3, and your client recognizes that it only supports version 3. If right now in V2 we add the supported versions and that agent also supports V2 and V3, then we would then be able to do that. So the only time you would call supported versions is whenever you don't, when your client doesn't support the version that it has, right? So even though it does add an extra one, you wouldn't have to call it every time. It would just exist there for the sake of compatibility.
And the other one would be /AP/info. Or is that going to be under the version number?
I think that should be AP/info. The way we're talking about it here.
Yeah, because the info endpoint should still contain the protocol version. The only reason, so the only reason the other one would ever get called theoretically is, hey, I have no idea like how this works.
Right. Now, forward thinking, if we were to make it so that you could have multiple agents in the endpoint in the same system, where you call like /agents or something like that and get a list of them, how would it work in that setting? And is that something that we want to do in the future?
Yeah, I mean, technically rooting it at the version number would work there, but then you would need a secondary call, right? Like it'd be a double call.
Right.
But that would only matter if it was an agent you weren't working with. Otherwise, I would expect you to cache what version numbers work.
Then I guess if the entire endpoint is the agent protocol, then the protocol should match all of the other agents that it has, right? Or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Hmm.
All right. So here's what I am proposing to the thing. Create a separate endpoint for supported versions /AP/supported versions.
Let's just call it
you-
versions for shortness. Be easy.
Could you
Hmm.
and then could you ensure that the /info has the last? God dang it! AI changed my thing to a question. Hold on, sorry, forgive me. AI is the worst, man. I tell you. And then make sure the /info endpoint has the latest protocol version supported. And we'd mount this at /AP/version/agent/info. Is that correct? What I sent in chat?
So basically, if supported version is 1 and 2, then the /info is basically the latest, which is v2. But they should still be able to do AP/v1/agent/info to figure out what the v1 info is, right?
Well, theoretically, they couldn't do V1, but they could do V3 because V1 doesn't
Wait,
have
if
the V1 won't
oh
have
right,
the
right, yeah, sure. If supported version says 2 and 3, the /info endpoint would return v3,
Yeah.
And
v3
V2.
agent info. Would
Yeah.
it also return v2?
Yeah,
What
there
would
would be
have
the
the latest?
two endpoints available in that setting, I think. So you would be able to call APv2 or APv3.
Okay, got it.
Does that make sense to
So-
everybody? Anybody got anything against that?
Well,
All right.
I'll comment that.
That's fair, and we can edit that RFC later, Nick, when we meet tomorrow. See you later, John.
Hi, John.
Right here. We had some questions for you. For PR number
What, you
40.
talking to me?
Yeah, for your RFC.
Well, shoot.
Okay. So you wanted a proposal for bidirectional communication. First and foremost, do you still see the need for that?
Thinking. Honestly, I'm not sure. Like, my idea for that was that you can have an agent working on a task, and the task and the steps of the task are one component, and then at the same time, you could be conversing with the agent, and it would converse based on its state and not based on its past.
Oh, interesting. So it allows stateful agents.
Yes, exactly.
I can see that being pretty useful. So for things like an agent that doesn't ever sleep, right? Where it doesn't necessarily have an associated task, it is simply existing, right? Maybe doesn't ever sleep doesn't like necessarily make sense. But in like the context of a person, I don't talk to puts in the way that I say, hey, to start off our discussion, here's a task for you, right? Sometimes I just talk to you. So I could definitely see a need for this. What about the rest of the team?
I personally also see a need for this. I think the proposal that he came up with is kind of like a what do you call it? Webhook proposal, right? So it's basically like, tell me when you're done to the server. And this is one approach, obviously, and it's the easiest to implement because we're REST-based right now. The other approach would be kind of allowing for some kind of like SDK that's WebSockets based. But this is probably the most easy and straightforward approach for now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
because
definitely
I did see Craig's proposal to make it about topics and associate like a whole bunch of substitute topics, but that seems more complex to implement than to make it work. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, his
So
proposal is
in terms of sequencing tasks, would you guys like are thinking that this will be a part of V2, or how do you think about it?
personally, I would see this as a V3, maybe. I don't have any urgent need for this today. Maybe later on we would.
yeah,
but
me neither. I mean, yeah, say. Sorry.
However, I could see other organizations needing this as certain agent architectures become more prominent. So I can see this as V3, at least.
If we can, if this discussion gets more mature, I don't see why not including the implementation into the V2, because I think based on the speed of change of things here, we're gonna get to like V50 by the end of next year. So if we can consolidate and make things into more into less updates, make this what I'm saying is change the schema as infrequently as possible, right, to guarantee some sort of reliability.
Okay. And we also discussed this being a plugin potentially. My concern with plugins is we haven't made much forward progress on them, to my understanding.
Yeah, we haven't with plugins.
So I would be hesitant to say, hey, let's make this a plugin when there's no real way to do that, right?
Yeah, even the other thing that was going to be good for plugins, the auth, that has turned more into something that we're looking to implement into the protocol itself instead of as a plugin. So you're right on that one.
Okay, so it sounds to me like we should get a full RFC drafted up for this. Either way.
Yeah, would you want to meet up sometime and write up a RFC draft RFC or something like that about this?
Yeah, sure.
All right, sounds good. We'll figure out details later on.
Yeah.
Anybody else have questions or comments on this topic?
Well, with respect to making new API versions, I do agree that we should change the schema as little as possible, but that does not mean we cannot push changes on a regular basis. Like some of the biggest companies that I know that expose APIs that are used by a lot of businesses, they push a new API version every half a year. And they're usually not very big changes, and they'll keep supporting the old version for like another year. But they are on V50, and people are still using the API, and migrating from one version to another is not a lot of work because they're small changes.
Right. Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. No, I'm just saying all I'm communicating. I'm all for adding another version, but all I'm communicating is that if we can, if this work is done at the same time the other work is done, which is the info endpoint work, then it doesn't make sense to push this work out as a separate version. So I think if we can group them, we should group them. If we can't, obviously, I'm not opposed to making a new version. Um, I'm just saying that like if there is a possibility for them happening to be done at the same time, we should group them together. Um,
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, thanks for clarifying.
Awesome.
All
All
right.
right. So next topic.
Yeah, so there wasn't too much today on the agenda. The only thing I wanted to say is thanks to Palau for updating the website. That PR was merged into it, and there's links there. We are going to be moving the website back into the monorepo as well, so there's that going on. But
Well, awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Bilal, for having.
Heck yeah. That is
Alright.
much appreciated.
And Zain, if you want to stay on afterwards, we can do some monorepo updates and with the Vercel.
Sure, sounds good.
Yeah. Cool. It's almost Christmas, guys.
I know, right? Pretty
Time
exciting.
passes quickly.
Yeah, no kidding.
Maybe that week we should take, so December 26th is a Tuesday. Maybe we should take that 1 week off so that you guys can have time with family and stuff. And
I
then we can
think,
resume in the New Year's,
I
Gen 2.
think the day after New Year's might not be the best day to meet either,
Okay.
mainly because New Year's night is when most people would be up super late and drinking.
Okay.
So I would assume meeting at 9:30 Pacific time wouldn't work. But so a 2 week break after next week's meeting, right?
I would
Yeah.
say for the second, I don't actually know if I need to take off. Like, I'm happy to, don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
But
I also would be happy to meet on the 2nd.
Okay.
yeah. But I'm also happy to not meet on the second, if that makes sense. I don't know if we'll have too much to meet about other than config options, which I think we can meet about next week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk next week and decide if we want to do the second, January 2nd meeting.
Sounds good to me. Anything else, anybody?
For the meeting or for this topic?
For the meeting overall and this topic, I guess.
Actually, yes. Because I've been like we already have support for artifact either user uploaded or agent generated in the API. Something we do not have is support for let's say one-to-many relationships between agents and workspaces. So having multiple agents working on the same container of artifacts. I do not at this moment have a clear proposal on how to implement that, but I think having that in the API spec would be very, very useful.
So you're
Because
talking about the artifacts, right? As workspaces, like files?
well, yeah, like an agent has a workspace and artifacts are contained in that workspace. But what if you could have multiple agents connected to the same workspace and interacting with the same files in there?
Oh, okay. And assuming that the agents wouldn't be able to just contact the other one for the artifact endpoint to get that information, like some other way to handle it that way?
Yeah, let me give an example. I have an agent that writes tests. I have an agent that runs tests. I have an agent that writes code, and I have an agent that is a project manager. Theoretically, most of these could work independently, right? The agent that writes tests writes new tests whenever there's new code, right? The agent that runs tests when there's new tests and tells the agent that writes code to do that, right? So they're all four working on the same project, but none of them own the files, which is what our protocol basically requires right now. Is that correct? And what's your suggestion? Like that, I know that's like a specific example, but is that correct in your understanding?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I also see that being a problem. There's a
Well,
lot of
I
multi-agent Go ahead, sorry.
I like where Zane's question is leading to though. Like, is there a way to do this without having protocol level support? Like, I feel like there is, right? Like, you can pass the link to the test case in one of the additional input, and then have the agent make changes on that.
Yeah,
Does
because
that
there is an additional output as well. And since we're talking about doing the config options, then an agent would be able to specify in those what the output would be, right? So, assuming you have your agent that writes code and then you have your other agent that runs code, right? Let's say the agent that writes code wrote it into an artifact and then returns that artifact ID in the additional output. Um, your, I'm assuming, orchestrator agent, or maybe it's the run agent that connects to the write agent, right? Would see that output and be able to um, do a get request on that artifact ID from the other agent. So there should be a way to do it in the protocol as it is now. But if you want something else, then I'm open to alternatives.
So basically, one agent would use the request artifact endpoint on the other agent to get it.
Yeah.
I could see that being a nightmare of communication, though. Let's say I want to edit 15 files. I have to make 15 API calls. And then and then I have to re-upload the latest version, right?
Or what
So
you could have is for the one agent to return back a set of, like, in the output, a set of changed files, right? And then it's a pointer to changed files, and then use that because it's returned to the client, and in the client you know exactly what changed files is, and then use that as the additional input to the next agent. It would just be one call. It wouldn't be 50 calls.
okay, I have to think about this a little bit more. I'm not convinced that this will work for what I'm imagining. But
Okay, yeah. Come up with some examples and happy to like take a look
yeah,
and see if it warrants a protocol level support. And obviously, if it can be done without protocol level support, then maybe it's not an ideal case for changing the schema for.
totally agree.
But yeah, let's discuss.
Agree.
Awesome.
Is someone speaking? They got cut off.
I don't think so. I think they just muted
Okay.
after the word or something like that. Yeah, definitely worth talking about the artifact thing. I can see your point. We can open that up in a discussion thread maybe. And talk more in detail about that. Besides that, anything else? Anybody?
No, I think we're good.
Alrighty. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a fantastic week. We'll meet up next week and probably take the Christmas break off. So see y'all on the flip flop.
All right, be safe, y'all.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
You too. See you later.
Bye and bye.